Life's too short to drive boring cars. So what is it that allows Lexus vehicles to run to 300,000 miles, but yet BMWs don't? Let's get into it now. So it's not a real shocker. Lexus is the upscale Toyota, and Toyota's been building reliable, durable vehicles for many, many years. While they're not flawless, they do run for a long period of time with minimal expenses. Unfortunately, BMW can't say the same thing. Do you think it's a fluke? Not really. There's actually reasons for that, and I'm going to share with you several of these reasons why BMWs just don't last, while a Lexus vehicle can go the distance. So the first major reason this all happens is because of quality. Now, it's not that BMW doesn't make a high-quality vehicle. As a matter of fact, there's argument that they almost make more quality in a lot of ways, but unfortunately, it's not in the areas that you really need it. That's where Toyota and Lexus actually step up the game and apply the quality in the places that you need it most. Now, Lexus very much follows the motto, if it's not broken, don't fix it. In other words, they follow the same routine model after model after model, and they very rarely change their drivetrains. And the drivetrains ultimately are where you're going to see the reliability concerns. They also have processes in place where they actually can challenge problems at the assembly line level. So if the vehicles are being produced and all of a sudden there's feedback at the owner end and some of these problems are starting to filter in, they're quickly readdressed in the moment and they don't wait for a whole production run. They actually try to address some of these problems in real time. And on top of that, the quality control and the pride that goes into the manufacturing of these Lexus vehicles are a big part of why they're so durable and so robust. Now, BMW, on the other hand, actually has different values. They value more innovation. Of course, at the hands of innovation often comes challenges with reliability and durability because they're always in the state of flux and change. Performance is also one that they value high because they're trying to live up to the motto as the ultimate driving machine, so they're always pushing the envelope of performance. And unfortunately, BMW also more values the marketing strategies and their business model, which just generates more income. So the second reason why Lexus can actually run the distance, and maybe BMW not as much, has to do with service intervals. While Lexus typically follows closer to what the industry standard recommends, 7,500 miles for an oil service, for example, Lexus stretches it a little bit. They go to 10,000 miles and an annual service at a bare minimum. And Lexus coolant intervals are also recommended to be changed every 2 years and 30,000 miles. And regarding BMW servicing, right here we have a 430 BMW. It's a 4-cylinder turbo in these vehicles. Now, currently BMW has a recommended service interval of 10,000 miles and annual, just like the Lexus, but that wasn't always the case. For quite some time, BMW actually had a 15,000 mile service interval for oil changes. That was way too much. Even 10,000 is still pushing your limits, but going 15,000 caused a lot of problems for BMW back in the day. What about timing chain tensioners that slackened up, as well as dissolving timing chain ramps, not to mention Vanos issues because it used the engine oil as well for some of the feed on that system. There was also issues with rod bearings in some cases, likely to do with the wrong weight of oil, but also extended service intervals. And if you could believe it, there was even collapsed oil filters because of the extended intervals. It started to dissolve the filters and the pleats started to collapse, and that was a sign that, hey, we've gone way too far. And now the other unfortunate part is the coolant servicing. Now, of course, I mentioned on Lexus, it's every 2 years or 30,000 miles, but BMW has now changed it to lifetime coolant changes. But that's kind of ridiculous because everybody knows cooling systems and BMWs don't mix very well. They're always leaking, you've got cracked fittings. So it doesn't take very long before you're actually changing a water pump, a thermostat, a set of hoses, or a radiator. And so it's easy for them to say it's lifetime because at some point it won't be lifetime. You'll be changing fittings anyhow due to the deterioration, and you'll wind up changing the coolant or flushing it at that point. So it's not truly lifetime on the BMW. So BMW wanted to build a vehicle that could last the test of time. Don't you think they would do that? They have some very, very smart engineers. But that's the unfortunate part. It's not the engineers determining this anymore. It's the bean counters or the accountants. Every vehicle now is designed for planned obsolescence. So in other words, they're designed to run the gambit of the warranty period, and then at that point they start to deteriorate. Because by the time the extended service intervals have caught up and created and wreaked havoc internally in the engine, that's around that 100,000 miles and 4 or 5 years, and BMW is no longer on the hook for servicing those vehicles at their expense. And this just unfortunately means the customer is going to have to pay dearly diagnostic fees, overpricing on the parts, high shop rates. All of that's going to land in their lap and pay out of their hard-earned dollars, and that's not by accident. That's actually by design, in my opinion. So the next topic is a conversation about performance. Everybody knows that when vehicles are pushed and stressed, that the challenges of reliability start to fall into place. Of course, already we mentioned that Lexus likes to keep it simple, where BMW is always pushing the envelope. For example, we'll talk about Lexus. They have a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine, makes about 241 horsepower. They also have a V6, which is naturally aspirated, making about 311 horsepower, and they have a 472 horsepower naturally aspirated V8. Notice the majority of their engines do not have turbocharging because turbos generate a lot of heat, and obviously it's not just the stressors, but it's the additional heat under the hood where you don't want it, where Lexus is trying to avoid those issues. Now, if you do a quick calculation on horsepower per liter, essentially that's a great way to talk about efficiency as well as the stress that you might expect to be imposed on an engine. For example, their 2-liter engine does see up to 120 horsepower per liter, which does suggest a fairly high performance, a fairly strong output, and a strong level of efficiency. That, of course, is stressed a little more. However, their naturally aspirated engines are 89 horsepower per liter for the V6 and about 94 horsepower per liter for the V8 engine, which would suggest a very strong output, but certainly not close to the BMW level, which we'll talk about. BMW has their own set of drivetrains. Right here we have a 430. This means it's got the B48. It's a turbo 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, makes about 255 horsepower, so it's up slightly from the Lexus. And they also have what we have here in this X5. They have the 40i series, so anything with the 40 designation, 340, 440, or 40, or anything like that, carries the B58. That's their inline 3-liter turbo 6-cylinder engine, makes about 385 horsepower in top state of tune. And then they have yet another engine in this 6 Series convertible, and that is the 650. That means it's got the 4.4-liter twin turbo V8, makes up to 523 horsepower in the top state of tune as well. So again, crunching the numbers for efficiency, horsepower per liter, the BMWs are at 128, and 119 respectively for the 4, 6, and 8-cylinder engines, which shows that on average they're about 25% more efficient or more power, horsepower per liter than the Lexus. What does that mean? More power, yes, but it also means more wear and tear, heat, and quicker deterioration than the Lexus typically. Next, we talk about the topic of engineering. Now, they both arguably have some great engineering teams behind them, but the focus is in a couple of different directions depending on the corporation. So BMW, in the ultimate pursuit of perfection and performance, unfortunately, they have to put equipment in place that does challenge reliability. For example, turbos under the hood, it's engineered to be tightly compacted for reduced distances between the turbo and the intake plenum, which generate a lot of extra heat. Unfortunately, the turbos are also mounted very close to the exhaust, which puts that heat source very, very close to critical engine components. That engineering exercise does challenge reliability, as does all the plastic parts in plastic intake manifold, plastic valve covers, plastic cooling hoses, plastic radiator necks, plastic thermostats, and plastic water pumps. Where for the most part, Lexus keeps it relatively simple, and again, without that heat source called a turbo under the hood, in most cases it does reduce the amount of impact that it has on the engine in a negative way. In addition to that, Lexus also utilizes more of a traditional cooling hose, your classic rubber hose that's conformed, sure, but it doesn't have all those awkward snap-on keyed plastic ends that are prone to leaking like BMW does. And while Lexus also has a variable valve timing, VVTi, BMW does have that, which is their Vanos system, which is their variable valve timing, but BMW also adds Valvetronic, which replaces the throttle body, and essentially which is the variable valve lift. So roughly as an average, Lexus stresses their engines about 25% less than the BMW counterpart, simply by lacking the use of turbocharging. And they also value the tried and true engineering point of view, whereas they actually continue to use the same product and just finely tune what they've got already. And so regarding engineering, BMW almost always goes a little overboard. The way they package their vehicles, we talk about water pumps, for example. I mean, BMWs have electric water pumps. Sure, they're nice for bleeding the system, but unfortunately, they're usually packaged down deep and very difficult to get access to. There's electrical connections, and they're far more fragile than a typical engine-mounted water pump that you'd find in the Lexus. So unfortunately, the water pumps, even though they're more efficient, there's less drag on the engine, generally are more fragile, way more expensive, more finicky, as well as have more prone to leak and crack because most of the time their housings are made of plastic. They create all these hoses, so they have these snap fittings. You snap them in, they're easy to put together and assemble in the factory. Unfortunately, after multiple heating cycles, under the hood what ends up happening is they start fusing together. So you have a connector and you have one connector and you have another connector on a hose and you snap them together and all that heating cycle expands, contracts, and you wind up with a situation where they almost fuse together and they're very difficult to pull apart. Where Lexus, on the other hand, more of a conventional screw clamp, rubber hose, none of those fancy plastic ends or connectors that are going to let you down when you need it the most. And sadly, it's that very plastic that means that there's always going to be some leak somewhere after you get 50, 60, 70,000 miles. Expect coolant leaks. It's a guaranteed effect. And another reason why the cars don't last that long is because second, third, fourth owners that buy the BMWs often don't necessarily go in deep because it's huge labor rates to repair some of these parts. The parts themselves are quite expensive, and it becomes a situation where people just live with check engine lights, coolant leaks, slight engine oil leaks because they can't afford it. And with all of that said, be sure to click on that video. We're going to share the top most reliable luxury cars available today. Hope to see you real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.